Next, I want to take up another issue that's important both for realists and idealists, and that is the issue of tracking and the issue of different ability levels that we find among our students in class. It is a reality in almost every classroom that you can have students of wildly different ability levels, wildly different ability levels and interests. And so there's a natural question then for teachers about how we are going to manage this. What's the significance of these abilities levels? Where do they come from? And so on. What we have found in idealism is that their view of human nature tends to interpret the ability levels in terms of a nativistic approach. That human beings are by nature preset with certain ability levels, and so the job of the teacher is to recognize those different ability levels fairly early on, and this can lead to a kind of tracking. The students who aren't on the more intellectual track, they will get a certain kind of education. Students who are on the intellectual track will, and students who are on a more practical education track will get a different sort of education. Now, all of that might be true in a realist curriculum as well, but the reason that the realists will get there is very different. As we've seen in realism philosophically, the realists tend to emphasize a tabula rasa view of human nature, the idea that students, all of us are born with an open-ended set of capacities, and so any student in principle can learn just about anything. It's not the case that any of us, at least early on, are incapable ever of learning calculus or to play the violin proficiently and so on. But nonetheless, it is true by the time we get the students in our class that most of them do have different abilities, most of them do have different interests, and certainly it is a social reality for teachers to deal with and a classroom management issue. How do I manage students with wildly different interests and ability levels? The realist answer is typically to try to individualize education as much as possible, rather than dividing students into ability level groups and then still giving them one size fits all in that context. What the realists are more likely to do is to say what we need to do is try to structure the educational environment so that students can, as much as possible, make their own choices about what they're interested in and go at their own pace, so that we're not putting greater demands on the students who are unable right now to do certain things, and we're not also slowing down those students who are able to go at a much faster pace. Now here I think of a couple of examples. One is Montessori education, which was developed in the early 20th century. One of the centerpieces of Montessori education is enabling as much as possible students to choose what activities they are going to work upon. The Montessori teachers, as experts in setting up the curriculum, have decided here are all of the important things and valuable things that we want students to learn, but within that framework we give students choices. What are they interested in working on in this unit at this time and so forth, and we let students work on those things for as long as they are interested. And then when the students are no longer interested, they then start to work on some other interest or issue rather that they find interesting and so forth. And the idea then is that the students work on things that they're interested in, they work at their own pace, and there's also assessment built into the units as much as possible. Students can get the feedback from their success or not at doing the units, and so the teacher then can divide her attention across more students in a facilitating direction as opposed to having to be the primary delivery mechanism for all of the information that's necessary. So I think Montessori's educational system, which broadly comes out of the realist approach, is an example of individualizing things as much as possible. One thing I remember from my own experience in the middle grades is a set of reading units where obviously students, some of them are very interested in reading, some students are less interested in reading, some students read very quickly, some students read more slowly, some students understand material on first pass, some students like to read things through a couple of times before they're ready to be tested on it and so forth. So we have a problem if we have a class of 25 or 30 students, if we try to make all of them read the same thing at the same pace and all them take the test on that thing at the same time. So the system I remember, I believe it was called the SRA reading system. What it did was The teachers and the experts in reading went through, and suppose we're talking about 5th grade reading, they would select, say, 100 stories that they judged to be appropriate for 5th grade readers to be exposed to, and they divide them, say, into units of 10. And so they'll have 10 stories at this basic level that would be suitable perhaps at the beginning of the year, and I'll just arbitrarily assign them the color blue. So we have 10 stories in the blue unit. And what we then do is we enable all students to choose which of the stories they're going to read. This might be a story on dogs. This might be a story on pirates. This might be a story on football. So the student can make his or her own choice about what story in the blue group he or she wants to read when it's time for us to do reading. And then the students individually can do their own reading. And then when a student feels that he or she is ready, approaches the teacher and says, I'm ready for the test on this story that I just read on pirates. And the teacher will then give that student a test. The student takes the test, the teacher reads it over. And if the student passes the test, then he or she gets a check as completed one story in the blue group. And then the student then chooses another story, whatever he or she wants, reads it, and so forth. But the idea here is that, again, students are choosing according to their own interest. They get to spend as much time on the stories as they feel is necessary before they take the test. But they're also motivated, right? I'm at the blue level right now, and so I want to read 10 stories in the blue level, because as soon as I get 10 checks in the blue zone, then I get to move up to the green level, and there's a whole bunch of more stories that I can choose from at that level, and we pursue then at the same pace. What one then can have over the course of an academic year is students in principle can go very quickly. They're already up to the silver level, right, or the orange level, while other students are still working their way through the green level, and that's fine. Students are still making progress. It's individualized, and it's not holding back the faster students, and it's not holding back the quicker students, or putting pressure rather on the slower students, and so forth. All right, so that's tracking, and the idea then would be if we can find ways to model that in other areas, in chemistry and across the curriculum, that can solve the tracking issues as well. We also aren't putting students in and typecasting them. It might be the case that there's a given student who's struggling with reading in the 1st grades, the 2nd grades, the 3rd grade, and so forth, but suddenly takes off in the 4th grade and becomes highly proficient. That's fine. We can accommodate that, as opposed to having decided in the 1st grade the student is a slower student, and so that person then gets stuck in this track for many years, and it's very hard for that person to jump back and so on.